Welcome to Media Evil, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah If Decker, a medieval historian, and today I'll be tackling another big series, currently just books, but soon to be a TV show, Wheel of Time. And as my guest today, I have the person who convinced me to spend the last year plus reading Wheel of Time, my original Media Evil co-host, Ollie Brady. Hi, Ollie.
Wheel of Time! See, what Sarah doesn't realize is that I'm editing this episode. Sorry, Sarah, you're going to learn that now. I'm editing this episode. And the intro music I just used, again, you don't know anything about this because we didn't play intro music before we started talking, is the song Wheel of Time of Blind Guardian. And I've synced it up so that that's when he would have said Wheel of Time. And I'm going to have played it over the background of myself talking because
Perfect.
That's how much I care about Wheel of Time.
I did not know that was a song.
Because it's... Oh, it's brilliant. No, wait. Hold on a second. It's fucking terrible. But it's hard not to when they're talking about like the dragon is reborn and stuff like this here. It's hard not to get into it. And it's got a strangely Turkish kind of sound to it.
Sure.
I was going to say Middle Eastern vibe, but it's definitely a Turkishy kind of tinge to the music. Anyway, Wheel of Time, best fantasy book series ever written. Don't care what anyone says. I know there are certain people on this podcast who are great big Tolkien fans, or as I like to call them, racism fans.
Oh.
But as a Wheel of Time fan, go Christians!
Wheel of Time does have some racism. Lord of the Rings does have some racism problems.
Oh yeah, I was wondering what you were saying there. I was like, what? They do? Oh, well, I suppose they do a little bit. But anyway, Sarah, how did you come to this book series?
I came to this book series because, I love reading just large fantasy series. That is very much like my book wheelhouse. And you convinced me to give this one in particular a shot. Wheel of Time, I took down statistics. Wheel of Time is in total 15 books, 14 books plus a prequel novel. It is, in the paperback version, 11,898 pages. I did not explicitly experience the paperback version because I just had this like massive single Kindle edition of this book that I would be like, you would be like, oh, where are you in the book? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like 12% of the way through the series. Who knows?
Yeah, the shocking thing about this is that there were a lot of times where Sarah would be telling me about something that was happening in the books. And just to preface this, I love this series. I've loved it as long as I can remember because I started reading it when I was 11, I think, right? And I've read it multiple times because I'm one of those idiots. There were lots of times Sarah would tell me about something, and like I'd know instinctively, I'd be like, oh yeah, so that's like near the start of book 5. And I'd say something like this, or like, how far into book 5 are you? And she would always give me these weird stats. Like, oh, according to this, I'm 27.4% through the book, and I have an estimated reading time left of 411 hours. You're like, oh, what? You could just tell me where in the book you are. Like, that's what I want to know.
Because that's all Kindle tells you. I could have like more usefully been like, okay, I'm on like chapter 12. But in terms,
yeah, that would have been helpful.
Yes, that would have been much more helpful. But then you actually have to like look that. Like, I don't know. Like I always found that more complicated to look up. And so I would just be like, okay, so this is like the percentage of the entire series that I'm the way through. Yeah. And like, this is
I've got 200 hours left, Ollie. I'm so close to the end. What?
And like, if I just sat down and read and did nothing for a week but read Wheel of Time, I'd be finished.
Yeah, that is very, like, there was a few times she'd be just, oh, it says here I'm 75% of the way through. I'm thinking, like, what is 75% of the way of the time? You're in book 11? Like, that's how normal human beings talk, Sarah. I'm in book 11, Knife of Dreams. I'm in chapter 3 of book 11.
I would tell you what book I was in.
The Return. But anyway, I was just wholly happy that Sarah was reading it.
Yes, and I had a ton of fun reading it, but it took me just in case, and for those interested in delving in the future who have not read it, although if you have, there will be a warning for you coming soon. It took me 15 months to read the entire series, and that is with some breaks. There's a couple other things that I really wanted to read, so I would pause between books. But in case anyone's interested, I would say, like, I think you could solidly read this book series in like about a year.
Yeah. When Sarah would take a break, I used to call those the barren times, because then my Wheel of Time discussions had stopped. Because when Sarah started reading this, they had just announced the TV show.
Yeah.
So as a What fan, you had lots of people talking about it at that particular time. And then as the news on the TV show kind of dried up, people just kind of fell off it. So there was nobody talking about it. I'm like going, I don't want to go and rejoin the forums because I'm past that part of my life. It's not 2012 anymore. I don't want to be online arguing with somebody over a small minor plot point in book 7. By the way, I was completely correct. But the amount of words that I committed to online forums is shocking.
So just as a kind of lead in, so we'll be, as I said, talking about Wheel of Time, which is a book series published between 1990 and 2013, created and mostly written by Robert Jordan, although he unfortunately died before completing the series. And my understanding is it was originally, there was only supposed to be one more book, but then Brandon Sanderson, who took over, made it 3 books.
Yeah, so the last book, Knife of Dreams, he died after Knife of Dreams, which is book 11. I think it was, he said he was going to try and finish it in 1 book.
Yeah.
It was originally meant to be 2. The idea was that he would finish it in book 13, because 13 is it's an important number in the series. I mean, everyone knows Unlucky Number 13, but in the Wheel of Time, if you have 13 evil magic wielders, you can forcibly convert a good magic wielder to become evil. So the idea of doing it in 13, you can link magic wielders together, and the idea of 13 is the strongest possible link. So that's what he was aiming for. Could you imagine how many pages would be? I mean, those last 2 books, like,
even if we cut out all the Androl stuff, it's still.
But like the last book itself, A Memory of Light, is 900 plus pages. And so imagine just the idea. I just have this image of this like monstrous looking thing on my shelf, and requiring like a stand to open it up, like, because like you might as well, if you're going to be doing that level of reading, you might as well have a big stand to hold it up. So Brandon Sanderson, and there are lots of people who hate Brandon Sanderson and for what he did to finish the books. There are lots of people who are existing Brandon Sanderson fans who think, I've seen this written down somewhere, I want to find these people and shake them, who say that the last 3 books are better written than the first 11. They're not. No. Like, they're not. Like, I am not a Brandon Sanderson here. He's a really, really nice bloke. He is not a better writer than Robert Jordan is. And I find it disingenuous when people go, no, he is, but he is. No, he's not. Like, and he didn't.
And reading them, I will say it took me a little while to adjust to his writing style. Once I got used to it, the books are great. I was worried I was going to be disappointed with the last 3 books, and I wasn't.
Yeah. He did a job that no other writer really could have done. He did his best to ape a style which is very individual.
Yeah. And, I felt ultimately like, I think he did a very good job. I wasn't sure that they necessarily made me want to read other things by Brandon Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson is, for want of a better term, extremely woke, right? In a genre which is full of neckbeards who like to write about women getting attacked and being weak, or who are just sex objects. Looking at you, Patrick Rothfuss, I don't care how many people want to tell me that you're a brilliant writer. You write women fucking terrible.
Oh my god, every single one of them is a sex object. Like, I read the first 2 books of the Kingkiller Chronicles, like,
In the Name of the Wind and Wise Man's
Fear. And like, because like they were both out and like they are, I will say, like he's terrible at writing women. They're interesting and well written enough books that I finished the first and was like, okay, I want to read the second. But now that I've had that distance from them, I don't think I'll read the third because I just get angry every time I think about how he writes women.
Whereas Brandon Sanderson is the exact opposite. Most of the people who are throwing criticism Brandon Sanderson's way are the same neckbeards who don't understand why his two of his big fantasy series, the main characters are women. Well, how I can't read this series because the main characters, I can't identify with Vin. You're like,
that's interesting.
Well, then don't.
I'm slightly surprised to hear that. In that, I am slightly surprised to hear that somebody who likes Gawain has otherwise decent optics.
He felt like he could redeem it. But as I always say, in countless situations, and you would not believe how relevant this is in everyday life. Fuck Gawain.
Yes. So this is probably the good point, by the way, to say there will not be a traditional plot summary because it's 15 books. We're not doing like a straight just like plot summary. I don't even know how many characters there are. 80? I don't know. There's a lot.
Did you just say 80?
That's too few, isn't it?
Yeah.
I meant like characters that I could probably name offhand if I sat down. And like when you get into the like I bet we know the name of like there are like 200 Aes Sedai. Like I bet you like know, like I bet we know the name and like something about all of them. I'm sure I don't remember the name or something about all of them.
Now Sarah said we're not going to do a traditional breakdown of this, but I have nothing but time, people. So strap in while I recount the tale of the Dragon Reborn from start to finish. 11,898 pages.
Here we go.
This is going to be a long one.
So there will not be a traditional plot summary. However, we will be talking about things from throughout the series. So that does mean that there will be spoilers. So if you have not read the series and would like to, or are hoping to go into the TV show fresh or whatever, you might want to pause and maybe come back to this episode later because there will be spoilers throughout.
Yeah, there will be a lot of spoilers. We're not going to do a full summary, but we're going to talk about what happens over the 15 books. I think Sarah has some talking points, which we're going to get onto in a minute, but I think we could probably give an overview of the series without needing to talk for an hour at this point. I mean, we could probably do in 10 minutes and describe what's going on. So, Sarah, how would you describe the plot of Wheel of Time?
So Wheel of Time opens, more or less, with the fact that you are following these three young men who are, and by the way, if I pronounce something in a way that sounds wrong, feel free to correct me because, I'm reading the book and I know there's a glossary at the back, but it's like a lot. So yes, you get to correct me on pronunciation for Wheel of Time.
Oh my God, people. I literally was like, this is my chance.
So there are these three young men who are identified as being Taveran, which are sort of people who kind of have this ability to kind of change or manipulate, not entirely intentionally, the pattern and kind of the way the world works. And one of them is assumed to be the Dragon Reborn, the reincarnation of a man known as the Dragon. He's just called that. He's not an actual dragon. Who was the individual who was the kind of last kind of big person who was the kind of main person responsible for having fought and then successfully imprisoned the Dark Lord years and years ago. I don't know how many years. Do you know how many years offhand?
3,000.
Okay. Years and years ago. So Luz Theron. And then basically there was like a backlash basically. And so the Dark One placed this taint on the male half of the One Power. So the kind of magic system is that there's the One Power and people who use magic are said to be able to channel and kind of channel into this power. And there's a male side and a female side. So he puts this taint on the male side of the One Power, which basically means that all of the men who use it go mad and become the worst. And Luz Theron in particular, murders his entire family. And does he kill himself?
He draws on the power so much so that he overdraws, that he literally destroys the earth underneath his feet and causes a seismic eruption, which results in a dragon mount, which basically is it creates a volcano. And this volcano is the tallest mountain.
And then according to the prophecies, the Dragon Reborn will be born on the slopes of Dragon Mount.
Just one thing to talk about there that Sarah mentioned is the importance of the separation of the magic system in this world, the power system, into male parts and female parts. So there are two different power sources. Think of them as yin and yang, because that's the symbol that they use to represent them, is that women draw from a power source called Satan and men draw from a power source called Sadar. So the reason that I'm going to bring this up is because I'm a physicist and Robert Jordan was a physicist. Think of them in terms of direct current and alternating current. So they're doing the same thing. They're, in the end of the day, they're both forms of electricity, but they're not the same thing. And you can't use direct current in a device that uses alternating current and vice versa. So men are attuned for alternating current, women are attuned for direct current. So what happened was that the Dark One, the equivalent of the devil, 3,000 years ago, tried to break free because some people went evil or turned evil, and were like, oh, hold on a second. This devil guy sounds pretty cool.
We're going to hang out
Let's
with him.
let him out. Exactly. So they drilled a hole into his prison. The creator imprisoned him at the start of things. So think of his own personal hell. And they drilled a hole into where he was basically in prison. And the dragon is the guy who was like, I'm going to go seal this hole. Yeah. And what happened was the women Aes Sedai, or magicians, or witches, whatever you want to call them, said, no, don't do that. And it was only men who went to seal that. And when they put the seal on, the last thing the Dark One was able to do was to lash out and attack the men who were sealing him in. And that's why the men's power source is tainted. So the women's power source is still clean because they weren't involved in the thing. And that's what happened is, so it's become tainted. So any male magic user who uses that form of energy will go mad. It's not, oh, you might go mad. You're going mad.
It might take a shorter or longer period of time, but you will go mad at some point.
The main character in the books goes mad. Yeah. There's no other way to describe it. He has visions and is talking to a person who isn't there. Later on, another magic user tries to heal him of the madness, and the way they describe how his brain looks with the madness on it is crazy, because she's like, I can take this out, and she heals somebody who'd only been using magic for a couple of weeks, and she's like, well, I'll try and heal you, and she tries to heal him, and it's like, oh no, nope. This is not happening. So that's the other interesting thing about it, is that our main character, the entire focus of the series, the dragon, is mad. He goes insane, and he's still a good guy, but there are points where he 100% completely loses it, and you're following a character who is insane through a lot of the story. Yeah.
So we follow these three boys, and then so they go with one of the Aes Sedai, Moraine, and her warder. So people, traditionally men, who are bonded to them, and then tend to be people who are more explicitly people. They tend to be people with fighting skills, right? I mean,
because one of the benefits to becoming a warder is that you get increased reflexes, and strength and endurance.
Yeah. So they are discovered by Moraine, who we learn in the prequel is explicitly going around looking for the Dragon Reborn. And she basically takes these kids because she knows one of them is the Dragon Reborn, but isn't 100% sure which. And then it turns out that they end up being then basically like followed by two of the young women from their village, Egwene.
Yeah, Egwene.
Egwene?
Most people would pronounce it Egwene,
No,
but
like that.
the back of the book says Egwene.
Okay.
So I've always pronounced it Egwene.
Egwene, who is initially said to be, is initially has some kind of low-key romantic-ish attachment to Rand, which does not last.
Yeah, it's a small village. They were, all but betrothed.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of like attractive people from families who get along of the same age. So it's basically like, yeah, they'll get married, whatever.
And her mom is also trying to marry off Rand's dad because Rand's mom has passed away. His dad is a single dad, character named Tam Althor. We'll talk about later.
Yes.
What a great character.
Yeah.
All dads should aspire to be Tam Althor.
He's a good dad. So Egwene goes with them, and we learn pretty quickly that she is with them in large part because she is interested in studying to be an Aes Sedai. That she is, I can't remember why she knows this, but that she thinks for whatever reason that she is able to channel.
Because when Moraine meets her, and anybody who can channel, which is what they call using magic, so just think they allow the magic or the electricity to flow through them. So they channel the electricity. A female magic user can sense it in another woman. So she senses it in Egwene and asks Egwene some personal questions, and it turns out that Egwene is good at healing people, and she has multiple times healed people beyond the point where everyone else had given up and decided that they were going to die. I wish she could have done that to Robert Jordan, but she had managed to do this, and Moraine is like, well, I think that you are going to have the power.
Right.
I can sense it in you, so you should come with us as well.
Yeah, so she comes as well, and then they're basically followed by Nynaeve, who also is somebody who is able to channel. She has something of a block for actually a lot of the series against being able to do so unless she gets extremely angry, which is fun because it is not hard for her to get extremely angry. And I really actually enjoy that about her.
When Sarah started reading the series, I knew before we even began that Nynaeve was going to be, if not her favorite character, one of her top three.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be Moraine.
Yep.
I knew it was going to be Nynaeve. And if I was going to pick one of the male characters, I would have said it was going to be Lan, but I could see her really liking Perrin as well.
Yeah, I really liked Perrin.
Yeah, I knew she would. Of the main characters, I find him the most boring. But that's just, I just don't think I identify with his character, whereas I identify with Matt so much.
Matt really grew on me because in the initial couple of books, he's kind of an asshole.
Yeah. And 100%.
And then really interesting things happen to him, and he's very much one that you can kind of see he grows up.
This is a thing that I'd say a lot of men. It's a common thing that men would describe themselves as, is that they wake up in the morning and they still have the mental age of a 12-year-old. They still, I love that in all of Matt's POV characters, he's still the same character from the first 4 chapters. He's still constantly thinking that stuff is funny, but then you can see him, he's talking about well, I better not say that was funny though. And you can see that he's learning to interact with the world, and he goes from living in a small village to being in castles. Yeah. And he's like, okay.
And he's always like, ugh, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to have to do this. And then he always does it anyway.
Yeah. He falls into responsibility so much because he's Taveran.
Right.
Which is, they attract, life events to them.
Yeah.
So they go in, there's a couple of scenes, for example, where we might as well give the game away. The main strongest Taveran of them is Rand,
since he is
the main character,
the Dragon Reborn.
And there's one of the books, and this is one of the things I love about the series, is Robert Jordan takes a book where he just has no Rand in it.
Yeah,
he just completely skips it. He's like, Rand has gone. Rand's gone on the run, and all of the rest of the book is them trying to catch Rand.
Yeah.
And they're following him. And they're just seeing the aftermath of what happens. So Rand goes into a village, and then suddenly everybody decides to get married. So all of these people who were in just relationships suddenly are like, oh, we're getting married. Even people who were only in casual relationships are getting married. But then there are other, so that's an example of good stuff that happens.
Yeah, but then on the flip side, there's like 5 people who had die in like weird freak accidents.
And it's not because Rand is neither good nor evil.
Yeah.
He just, the fate is swirling around him like a whirlpool, and sometimes it's going to the edge and sometimes it's going to the sinkhole.
Right.
And the edge represents the highs and the sinkhole represents the lows, and that's what Rand represents. And Matt and Perrin, to a lesser extent, also have this around them, and Matt just happens to involve him getting more and more and more responsibility heaped on top of him.
Yeah.
It's funny to think that the kid who always wanted to be a lord, always wanted to get out of the small town, by the time it's finished, he is effectively an emperor.
Yeah. Or, well, I would say consort of the Empress, since, and then Perrin's thing is that he finds out eventually that he has this, like, link that he can talk to wolves, and, like, basically, like, and, like, almost, like, exist, like, he doesn't, like, shapeshift, but he can almost, like, exist as a wolf, essentially.
Yeah, so he takes on wolf-like qualities, and when we say wolf-like qualities, there's, oh, God, I don't know how explicit we're not going to go down the whole plot. I realize we've had this for 20 minutes. There are multiple dimensions in this series. So in one of them, Tel Aran Riod, which is like a dream world, the wolves can exist in the dream world.
Right.
And he becomes a wolf. That's the only time he ever transforms into a wolf, is when he's in a dream. In the real world, there is none of that mysticism kind of stuff.
Like, he can communicate with the wolves, but he doesn't change shape or anything like that.
Just for the record, we're scratching the surface of what's going
absolutely.
on in this series. But yeah, he can talk to wolves, and it's cool.
Yeah. I mean, so of course he's, like, my favorite at the end. Like, a man who can just, like, hang out with dogs all the time. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah, that's true. And they're all super friendly to him, except for one who was really mean to him. But then, you know, they become friends.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, you know, he just, like, hangs out with dogs. Like, that's what I'd want to do.
So they leave with Moraine, because Moraine knows that one of them's Dragon Reborn, doesn't know which one it is. They go and they start picking up the rest of their party, basically, or meeting the other characters who's going to be in. So we meet a character named Min, who can see the future in a very limited way.
She sees, like, images around people's heads, basically.
And if she can interpret them, they will always come true. And that's very important later on. Then we go and we meet Elaine, who is a princess.
Yes, which does mean in this particular country that she is the heir to the throne. That
she will be the queen. Yeah,
that it is a country in which the presumption seems to be that only women would inherit the throne. And so are she going to win twins?
She is the younger sister.
Okay, yeah, so she's actually younger, right. And so the presumption is that she will inherit, and then there's sort of roles that her brother is assumed to have, that is assumed to, in theory, have, but, like, he is not eligible, really, to inherit the throne. Or as we sort of see in practice in terms of what happens in Andor, like a kind of mess of assorted claimants to the throne, depending on how things are going, but...
I meant we can talk about that later on, but I love that whole stuff. There's a lot of people find that section boring, but the whole who's next in line to the throne, when it's clearly Elaine,
right?
But you can also understand after what happens and how it goes down. You can also understand exactly what leads the other factions to not want her to be. Like I said, there's so many layers to this.
Yeah, the short version, by the way, for those listening, is essentially that her mother makes a number of extremely poor choices influenced by a man, or so it would seem to an outside viewer. But what's actually happening is that that man is one of the Forsaken, one of the, like, basically companions of the devil, and that he is essentially like magically influencing her. So it's not just that like she's dumb, it's that she is literally being basically like controlled by magic.
Yeah, and when Sarah says it's not that she's dumb, I again, this is something I was so immersed in for years. It's generally regarded that Morghese is one of the most intelligent people in the entire series. So like there's power rankings, you can go find them. I could probably give you the exact address on the internet to find them because I wrote a bunch of them. But if you look, there are also intelligence rankings, and she's always in the top 10. She's an incredibly astute woman. She was running their country magnificently to the point where other kings and queens that we meet throughout the 8 or 9 books, they have nothing but admiration for her.
Yeah.
Even the people that she was de facto at war with have nothing but admiration for her. There's a point where the neighboring country, who they're mortal enemies and have been for thousands of years, when their ruler dies because he's a scumbag and Tom kills him. Good job, Tom. Yes. When he dies, Tom Merlin lives in the woods like Tom Bombadil. he does not. He's actually useful as a character.
I was going to say, I don't think he's a Tom Bombadil type.
No, he's not. So there's a legit movement to have her become the queen,
right,
of the enemy state. That's how in high regard she is. But because she was under the influence, like if we bring this down to the level of a Harry Potter, so we hate trans people now for some reason, but if we bring this down to the level of J.K. Rowling, they're under the Imperatus course.
Right, it's...
because she didn't definitely take that from...
Although I will say like this, it's really interesting because it's very complex, that there's also a very clear explanation that, it gets kind of revealed more explicitly throughout the book, but that there's different layers of compulsion, that there's essentially one version that basically like there's certain like you can't do things that are against the will of the person, but like the way you behave in most aspects of your life might lead people to think that you're normal, and like you can do things of your own initiative. It's just that you would be stopped from doing things of your own initiative that would be against the wishes of the person exercising compulsion. And then there's the like intense end of the spectrum where it basically breaks your brain.
So that you can set somebody off, or it's like a Marvel character, it's like Winter Soldier. You read the right code words and it takes off. And there's no evidence of it. Like if somebody has been compelled or under compulsion, there's no, it's not like suddenly they change the mood. They'll do something and then talk about it normally afterwards. Like it's the way it's written is just, it's wonderful.
And in the last books, there's like this particular, like I actually really love how subtle it is, that we find out that the main generals in the last battle, that all of them are under compulsion, but they're under compulsion in this way that's so subtle that like they basically like they think that they're like fighting the battle to the best of their ability, and then they keep making these little mistakes, and it's only gradually that you realize that actually everything that they're doing is set up to make them to like sabotage their tactics and make them lose the battle, but that they don't know that this is happening to them. It takes a long time for other people to realize that this is happening to them, as opposed to, that like they were tired and screwed up.
Yeah, exactly. So we get Elaine. She doesn't join the party just yet, but she's going to in book 2. They separate or whatever. They go their separate ways. Stuff happens. They eventually get to the end of the first book, where Rand has a showdown with the Dark One, with the devil. Yeah. And he has, might as well describe it, as a full-on fist fight with the devil. Because when Robert Jordan was writing this was back in 1988, 89, published in 90, he wasn't certain that he was going to have he wasn't even certain he was going to have a 5-book series. Right. He was told it's a standalone book. So book 1 has an ending. Book 2 has an ending. Yeah. Like you could finish the end of book 2 and it would be, in my mind, the greatest duology of just 2 books out there you could get. But each time it had been successful enough for him to get the green light to go
Right.
on 3. It wasn't until book 3 that you have an ending which clearly is set up
Right.
to continue into the next book, because that's when he got the long form contract, which is something I've talked to Sarah about a lot, is that a lot of other writers aren't under those constraints specifically because of the success of Wheel of Time.
Right.
So George R. R. Martin doesn't have to have a definitive ending to Game of Thrones.
And he never will.
Well, he's not going to have a definitive ending to the series. But the first book of Game of Thrones clearly is setting up for stuff in book 2.
Right.
Right? I mean, the entirety of it is, this is like, we're going to have a war now, and the war is going to take place. Whereas, because the first book of the Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, he had to nail an ending just in case it didn't get picked up for a second book or whatever.
Right. And, and Martin at this point, like, he has certainly, I won't include Game of Thrones spoilers in this podcast episode, but, there is a huge cliffhanger right at the end of book 5 that has not in the books been resolved because he hasn't written them. Although it was obviously resolved in the show because that's over. But it's like an intense cliffhanger. And like, I remember reading it and being like, Jesus Christ, like, when's the next book coming out? To which the answer is never. But it's a lot.
I remember the cliffhanger you're talking about. It's one of the few times I've picked up a book and thrown it. Finishes up, has a fight with the Dark One, leads into book 2. They discover a thing called the Horn of Valir, which is meant to be used in this final confrontation between the good side and the evil side. Remember, that's going to be book 14. It's a long way away.
Yep.
But again, because it ends up getting used at the end of book 2.
Yeah.
Because the idea was that could have been the final battle, because he didn't know if he was going to be able to write on it. But
if you're reading it, when I was reading it, you're like, okay, I mean, they blew the horn, like, but obviously, that was like the minor horn blow.
The weird thing about that is the horn has the grave is no bar to my call. I have considered getting that as a tattoo.
Do it.
More than once. I don't have tattoos. I'm never going to have tattoos. The idea is that you're following these characters. The female characters, female character. Jesus. I understand that's the correct way, but I can't help feel incelish to describe the women in a book as females.
Right. It's like every time you hear the word female now, it's like, no.
Yeah, that's what it's like. They've ruined the use of the word female, even when you're correct to use it, because a female needs to be more feminine.
I actually literally commented on that in an article that I did peer review on anonymously.
Good. I'm delighted you did.
That like you can't do this. Like every time you wrote female, you need to change it to women. Like we can't do this anymore.
So the younger women go off to Lady Hogwarts, which is Hogwarts for women to learn to be magicians or witches or whatever we want to call it.
But also like more badass Hogwarts. Like this, like this is like, yeah, I mean, Hogwarts is a school for children. Like this is for grown-ups.
Yeah, even though they are 13, 14, 15, I think. I think Elaine's 13 and Egwene's 15. Or Egwene's 15. When they go into the thing, like there's a legit chance of death.
Yeah.
It's called Tar Valon or Valon. And it's where the Aes Sedai is their seat of power. It's where the main Aes Sedai, who's the queen of the witches, Tamirlan is the male version, which doesn't get mentioned at any stage in the book.
No, it does not. I was like, I have never heard that word before.
That's the rank that Luz Terran had, so that's Rand's character 3,000 years ago, the original dragon. He was the Tamirlan, so he was the head of the male Aes Sedai. Again, no reason for me to know. I have no idea how I know that. But so the idea is that they are learning to be magicians, and that's when they bring in my favorite thing in the books is they color code the witches on what they're interested in. And I know Sarah's mentioned she's going to bring it up later on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they then bring in the idea of this black, hidden, secret Aja.
Yes.
Or group of the women. And I just think it's fantastic. I love it. I love it so much. Is that it's like, again, I'm going to compare this to Harry Potter because it's hard to talk about how much of the Harry Potter universe is just a bad, and I love Harry Potter, and we've talked about this loads of times here, but it's just a bad facsimile of what's going on here.
And in particular, it's also, so the Ajas make so much more sense to me because I've been like grumping a lot recently about the fact that, so there's a tweet that expresses very well that, that it's basically like founder of Hogwarts talking to the school board and goes, so we all know there are four types of children, smart, brave, evil, and miscellaneous. And the school board's like, yes, continue. And it's like, this is ridiculous that you sort these 11-year-old children into these houses that then like define their personal characteristics like forever, apparently. And so I really like that the Ajas, like, you choose your Aja. I mean, they have to agree to let you in, but like you choose your Aja / your Aja like chooses to accept you based on your skills and abilities. Yeah.
Only at the end of your, I mean, I was going to say 7 years, but 7 years.
Like when you become a full
minimum.
Yeah. Like when you've become a full Aes Sedai, which would normally be 7 years. Although we obviously have some characters who like it starts to get wonky with certain of our major characters.
Yeah. Where a lot of people complain about this because basically the three characters that we follow in Tar Valon are Elaine, Egwene, and Nynaeve, and they're all brilliant.
Yeah,
like they're all the strongest power users that we've had in 1500 years, with the exception of Katsuan, who's a badass, and that's the other character that I think would be your favorite.
I love her. I love her so much.
But she's
the mean grandmother everybody needs.
Yeah, she's awesome. But they are awesome at everything automatically. And the amount of times I've had arguments with people going, they're Mary Sues. They're all Mary Sues. We call them the Supergirls because they're Mary Sues. They're going, you do understand that Matt, who has no formal training, just beat 4 swordsmen who do have formal training in a fight with a stick.
Yeah, like Matt, Rand, and Perrin have the same thing, basically.
They've all got it.
Yeah.
They're all, because the idea is that the creator, God, has effectively engineered these people to fight the last battle for him.
Right.
Because on the other side, the Dark One has engineered his people to fight the last battle for him.
Right. And that was very clear to me, I feel like relatively early on, was that like there must be something going on in the universe that like the moment when that essentially like at basically the same time as the dragon is reborn, you also like people are suddenly stronger, and like a number of these women are stronger in the one power than like has been like normal for centuries.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense because they're required.
Yeah.
Right? And even when we talk about the heroes of the Horn, the idea is that anybody who dies, you're basically reincarnated, right? So time is a wheel, and you're a thread in the great tapestry of the world, and your thread can get used, but then if you imagine a jumper, they unravel it and then put it back in. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you're making this continuous long tapestry, we don't need the tapestry from 4,000 years ago again, so they'll pull it apart and then weave you back in. And if you get woven back in, you're required. And some of these hero threads will always be heroes and will always do significant things, right? So just think of it as a gold thread in a red shirt. Mm-hmm. If you see it, it's going to stand out.
Yeah.
So these heroes can be recycled as the world, so they have 20 different lives and 20 different sets of memories. The female characters, these like Egwene, Elaine, Nynaeve, Olivia is another character we meet later on who's just like incredibly strong in the power. They're required. That's why we have them. That's why they're there. And it's a very male-oriented genre, or always has been.
Right.
And you get a lot of people going, they're so good, they're all Mary Sues. But the reason I was getting to the Black Aja is that we have all these good Aja, and the interactions with the Black Aja starts bringing us into the bad guys in the books, which is what we call dark friends. They are people who are evil.
Yes.
And have decided to side with the devil. Now, it's a really weird thing because obviously we're following and supporting the good guys.
Right.
And we're good people, or at least one of us is.
Supposedly.
Supposedly. And it's hard for us to get into the mindset of why somebody would pick what is going to be the bad. Right,
if
the
they're
devil
basically
wins,
explicitly like, we are the side of evil, would you like to join the side of evil? I mean, it's similar to Star Wars in some ways, right? That's like, like who's like, that there's like the like, oh, who's gonna like be like, yeah, I want to join the dark side.
Exactly. So because it's so obviously good versus evil, they have to keep themselves secret.
Right.
And they've got secret handshakes and secret ways of doing them, but they pop up so often, you can never tell whether a character is going to be good or evil. There's one character in particular that we meet in Tara Valon. We meet her in book 2. And we're going to talk about it later on. Her name's Varen. And she's amazing. What a character.
She's in the Brown Aja, which is the nerd Aja. So I especially appreciate her.
She's out, and that's one of the things. Sorry, the Aja is just when we talk about. I was comparing it to Harry Potter houses, and there's 4 in the Ajas. The color just represents the stuff that you're interested in. So grey Aja represents people who are in the logical, and they're usually used as mediators,
right?
And they'll be sent out to governments to form peace treaties. They're still magicians. They still do all the same magic stuff that everyone else can, but they focus on that sort of stuff. The white Aja are like philosophers. They're thinkers, because the idea is that they're not picking a side. So they're not even used in the same way that the grey Aja is. They're used as equivalents of Plato, and they're having philosophical conversations. Brown Aja are for people who are interested in books and history.
They're the researchers,
and historians, and the researchers, and they are looking through and they're trying to find, what sort of information can we learn that allows us to not repeat the same mistakes that we did in the past. They are incredibly important characters, as Sarah would tell you. Green Aja are the ones who are mostly more powerful. They generally tend to have the slightly more powerful power users, and they're the ones who are more interested in men.
Mm-hmm. They're also traditionally the battle Aja, and so they tend to be presented as more interested in men, but it also makes sense that like they more consistently have warders and have multiple warders because they're the ones that are more likely to be going into battle.
Sorry, and that's what I meant by interested in men, as opposed to like they love men because they see the worth in men, because they are more into the battles, and that's in the world of the Wheel of Time as we're in. Men are for fighting, women are for basically ruling, effectively.
Right, with a couple of exceptions. There tends to be in most of the cultures the assumption that the main people who have a military role are men. Yeah.
Then we get the Blue Aja, and they're the behind the scenes. We're involved in causes. If you were a vegan, you're likely going to end up being a Blue Aja because your cause would be to go and fight for animal rights. If you are somebody who wants wind energy to be changed, you're more likely to become a Blue Aja because, again, you're fighting for the environmental or the environment. So you're blue. Yellow Aja is for healing. And they're the ones that are going to be more concerned with healing. And then we get to the last Aja, not the least Aja. They're an awesome Aja. The Red Aja. And they hate men. That's their defining characteristic. They don't all actually hate men, but that's the short
end
of it.
They're the people whose responsibility has been for at least the last 3,000 years to go out and find, and the term used is gentle. So essentially basically make it impossible for male magic users to be able to actually use their magic. And, like, if they're already kind of insane, they stay insane. And, like, since it seems like the way they do it, they, like, almost are effectively lobotomizing them, and then they, like, all kill themselves. But, you know.
Exactly. They effectively unplug them. So, again, I always talk about the power in terms of electricity. They unplug the men from the source.
And so... Yeah, so the Red Aja, I definitely, like, was reading it, and I'm like, okay, so the Red Aja is, like, the mean Missandras Aja.
Yeah.
But it does definitely get complicated, and there are great characters, especially in the later books from the Red Aja, although also some of the, like, worst character, like, the character that I would say is the... Well, except for Gawain. The character that I would say... The character who's the most evil character who's not a dark friend, I would argue, is Red Aja.
Yeah,
is Elida.
So I'm assuming you're talking about Elida.
Of course.
Did you just say Elida?
I was thinking Elida.
That's actually the correct pronunciation. I don't want to talk about this too much here because, again, I'm aware of how long we're going.
Right, and we're like, we're not going to do a plot summary, and now it's like we've been recording for like an hour and 20 minutes, like just talking at the plot.
And we're talking about a character that's introduced in chapter 19 of book 1. And, like, that's when she comes in. It's called Camelin. It's a good chapter. But she is such a well-written character. We don't get a POV from her until book 7.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I guarantee, as you're reading it, you think that she is a dark friend.
Yeah.
Because
I certainly thought that was a possibility, yeah.
Everything she does is the wrong side. Like, and it just turns out, no, she's just making bad decisions. But she's making bad decisions that constantly do it. And she's petty. Yeah. And she's angry. And she holds grudges. And
but she's such a jerk.
She's a jerk. And that's what I love about it, is because you're sitting reading a character who is not a villain. She's not a bad guy. Because if you're a villain, you're on the side of the dark friends.
Right.
She's not. She's just a jerk.
Right. And I will say, like, I do actually like, so on the one hand, like, it is this, like, narrative between good and evil. But on the other hand, like, it's not exclusively that. Like, there are multiple sides in a number of places where, like, that isn't actually how it totally maps out. So, I mean, then I think Elida is actually one of the most interesting examples of that, is that, so the White Tower, Tarvalon splits. And there is Elida, who is the Amerlin of the White Tower, because she deposed and stilled the previous Amerlin because she sucks. And then there's
Elida sucks. The previous Amerlin was awesome.
Yes, so that Elida sucks, so she... Yes. Yeah, see, when the previous Amerlin is great. And then, so there's this White Tower in exile, essentially set up, and... Egwene ends up becoming the Amerlin of that White Tower, which was awesome, and I was super excited when that happened.
So you're saying there's a White Tower and then a White Tower in exile, and you have two leaders of these towers?
Yes.
Almost like two popes?
Yes. It's basically is the Great Schism.
It is.
Yeah, no, it's totally the Great Schism, which is cool. And so you have this, like, Great Schism narrative, and, like, it turns, and one of the things that's interesting is, clearly because of how the books are set up and because of what we know about the characters, we're clearly siding with the White Tower in exile and siding with Egwene and siding with the people that are working with her. But it turns out that, like, basically, so when eventually they are able to find out and identify the Dark Friends, the members of the Black Aja, they're, like, pretty evenly split.
Yeah. There's a weird split. And the fact is that we're following, as you said, we're following the good guys. And the beautiful thing about the way the Black Aja is split is that they're bad. They're bad guys, but they're not stupid.
Right.
Like, nobody who's in the White Tower is stupid. No. They're all intelligent women. They're all trained. They're all, like, it's a school, a fancy school. Yeah. They're still taught history and English. It's not like Hogwarts where, there's no maths class, right? They're still learning regular stuff. But they have their magic classes and magic lessons that go with it. If men go to the White Tower, they can go to learn to be soldiers because they need to have an army or whatever. But the beautiful thing about it is that we find out in book 8 that there's a character. I think I'll just say her name, right? Yeah. So it's Sheriam.
Yeah.
Who, for 7.5 books, because she doesn't show up. So, she doesn't show up until book 2. So for 7.5 books, because it happens in book 8, she is the nicest character in books.
Sheriam seems great. I was legit surprised about Sheriam.
You did.
And the character that there is, I think you said that there is a giveaway, which I did not notice in any way and was very surprised, is it turns out that Varen is a dark friend in the sense, at least, that she has like formally taken those oaths, but that she's actually like that she's a double agent, basically.
Yeah. So
triple
one
agent?
of the things that Aes Sedai, she's a triple agent. Yeah. So one of the things that the Aes Sedai have is they take 3 oaths, right? One is that they will never lie, and it's an actual forced oath. They can't ever speak a lie. So if I held up the number 1 and you had taken that oath, you couldn't say it was number 2. You'd get as far as that's number 2, and you wouldn't be able to do it. So you can't lie. That's one of the tenets. They're not allowed to kill anybody unless it's self-defense, and they're not allowed to create a weapon. And then, because back in the War of Power, people were making swords that would fire lightning.
Right.
I mean, people die when that sort of stuff happens. So they made this one of the rules, right?
Yeah.
So that people would trust the Aes Sedai. So the idea is that people still are mistrustful of them because even though it was 3,000 years ago, the world was destroyed, basically.
Right.
So people have this mistrust for them. But they have the 3 oaths. One of them is you can't lie. Varen lies in book 2, right? Now, you have no way of knowing.
Yeah, because in book 5, somebody's like, "Oh wait, did Varen say that? That doesn't sound right."
Yeah, and that's the way it's like. Well, that's interesting. And then that character dies, so she doesn't have a chance to go and follow up on it.
Yeah.
But even then, you're still like, maybe it was just a miscommunication.
Yeah. Yeah, because especially by that point, if you're reading the books, you're like, I don't know, Rand is kind of dumb. Maybe he just misremembered what Varen said 3 years ago.
Exactly. And then the other thing about it as well is, because Varen is good.
Yeah.
But there are other stuff that happens. She shows up as a major character. She's in book 2, doesn't really do all that much in book 3. She's there, but she doesn't do a ton. In book 4, she completely randomly shows up in the 2 rivers again when Perrin goes back to the 2 rivers, and she's like, "Oh, I'm just here to collect more young women." Well, it turns out that the timeline for that doesn't really work up because she didn't go back to the tower, so she obviously got her instructions from other places, and she had been instructed by a higher up in the Dark Friend Society to go to the 2 rivers. She didn't know Perrin was going to be there. That's why she's shocked to see Perrin there.
Yeah.
Right? The idea wasn't to get Perrin there, it was to try and get Rand. People are always trying to get Rand to come, and he's always like, "Nah, I'm going to let my buddy do it." Because it happens 3 or 4 times. Like, nah,
it's hard to kill.
I'm good. I'm going to go this way. But my friend's going to go that way. Oh, is he dead? Might be. But yeah, anyway, look, I think we're getting, I could genuinely talk about this all day. Wheel Time is brilliant. It's so intricate. Everything that makes sense. I understand that people will have difficulty getting through the first book. I also understand that the first chapter really separates men and women out as being at odds with each other. But Sarah is about as much of a feminist as I know. And I think she would agree that women are written at least as strongly as men.
Yeah, and so actually I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about women and gender, so we can kind of move into talking about some kind of general themes. So so I'm going to talk a little bit about women and gender. The first thing is that I think I think a lot of the female characters are great. I think that certainly they are as the strongest female characters are easily at least as strong as the strongest male characters in terms of character development and things like that. And I think they're great characters who I like a lot. A lot of my favorite characters in the series are some of the women. Egwene and Nynaeve started out as people I liked and really stayed my favorite characters.
Well, Egwene's story is brilliant.
It's so cool.
A whole way through book 11, book 12, it's choice.
Yeah. It's also interesting because, so we start out in Two Rivers. And Two Rivers is interesting because Two Rivers is one of the nations or cultures or societies that has, I would argue, the most traditional gender roles in a kind of traditional, and like what we mean by like, Western European, say, gender roles, that there certainly are more leadership roles officially for women. So Nynaeve, for example, is the wisdom, and so she has this kind of like actually official role as like, basically it's like she's sort of in charge of the women.
Mm-hmm.
But that there's certainly like very sharp gender division, that there are groups and things that are for men and groups and things that are for women. And that is how things work, and people don't really question it. And
one of the things I mentioned in the first chapter is people read it, and if you go online, you will find criticisms of it, and they're always the most one-sided criticisms, because I genuinely don't think that you can read even 5 chapters into this book or into the series and think that it hates women.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But in the first chapter, not the first real chapter, because the prologue features 2 men and then making a mountain, but in the first chapter, you have the women's council, or the women's circle, led by the wisdom, and you have the council, which are the men.
Yeah.
And when the women leave the room, the men say like, "Oh God, women, God, they're just, they're going to do this," right? That's how men talk, right? If you put a group of men in a room, they're going to talk. When the women leave, they're going to say stuff like, "Oh, women cause problems." And I've seen this criticism loads of times, and I genuinely think that people who criticize it without talking about the very next set of sentences, which leaves the men because the door gets closed, and we're with Egwene at that time, and Egwene is talking to the women's circle, and the women's circle say the exact same thing about the men.
Right.
Which is, we're going to let them have their chat for an hour, and then when they come out, they'll do what we want them to do.
And the other thing which I think is really interesting is that, so to the extent that you have people expressing attitudes that are misogynistic, you do have, I think, a kind of undercurrent of misogyny to some extent in our 3 main characters, that Rand, Mat, and Perrin all say things, like all have like some amount of like, ugh, women, am I right? In terms of their discourse, like that's very much something that is apparent, especially in the earlier books. There's also this thing that like they clearly like are unwilling, even when there are women who are clear threats to them, that they're like, oh, I can't kill women. Or when there are women who are clearly militarily capable, they're like, oh, I can't let them fight. And, which is also misogynist in my view. And
oh no, that's 100%. But I don't want to feel like I'm jumping to fight with you on this. I think Jordan wants you to read that as misogynist.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like I think that the way they act is realistic to how a 16-year-old boy, which is what they are at the beginning, right? They're 16.
Yeah, I think Matt is just ever so slightly younger than he was. Yeah, it was 15.
Yeah,
16.
so like
it was going to be his birthday like the week after. That is again information you don't need to know.
Like I think that's 100% reads true to me as ways that 16-year-old boys who grew up in a fairly traditional gender system would think and talk about women. And I don't think that and even though they're the main characters, I don't think that the views that they are expressing are meant to be the views of the author. And I think that especially as you go through the books, like I think they even like develop more complicated views about women and gender.
That's the thing that really comes across, because as a fan of the books, and I never describe myself as a feminist, and I'll never describe myself as woke, and I won't do anything like this here, but I can say that, hand on my heart, I'm not a prick, right? And but I'm not an incel, and it's all voluntary. But I'm not one of those people who looks down on women or sees something. But I remember being a 15-year-old boy living in Ireland, and if a girl had slapped me, I would not have slapped her back. When I'm a young fella and I'm reading about Rand I think the first time he kills a woman is in fact I know exactly what it is. It's in book 3, where he gets accosted by 10 men or 9 men and a woman in the woods, and he kills them all without, he goes into defense mode and ends up killing them, and then he doesn't even realize that I think she was a woman at the time, but then when he's looking at the bodies, he's like, oh my god, I killed a woman. He doesn't shut up about that.
And he has this list of like women whose death he is responsible for. So there's like the rare woman that he's actually killed, but then a lot of like women who are basically like, I am taking personal responsibility to like be a part of your bodyguard and would like to fight. And then he's like, oh my God, I'm responsible for her death. Like, no, dude, you're not. Like, she's just as capable militarily, if not more so, than you are. And she has every right to fight if she wants to.
So Rand ends up being the head of the Aiel.
Yeah.
Who are a warrior race where men and women are equally adept at fighting.
Right.
To the point where, in fact, most Aiel men would admit that because they fight with spears and it involves a lot of agility, that most of the maidens of the spear, as they call them, are going to be better than the men are because they're better designed to the weapon that they choose. And yet Rand is still sitting there like, no, women can't fight for me. And they're like, dude, these women would fuck you up.
Yeah, seriously. It's like, Rand, like you should sit the fuck down and let these women like be in charge. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And there is like the Aiel are interesting in that on the one hand, it is very clear that there's this kind of expectation or possibility, at least, for women to be involved militarily. And there's also some kind of leadership roles for women among the wise ones. But however, the clan chiefs are all men, and also that being a maiden of the spear is presented as being incompatible with marriage and childbearing and child rearing, whereas men can still maintain a kind of military role even if they get married and have children.
Yeah, and the women, when they become maidens of the spear, they're said to be wedded to the spear. If they get pregnant, they have to make the choice of becoming a mother or staying with the spear. If they become a mother, they give up the child for adoption, and they're not allowed to know where the child goes. It gets taken to a different clan. It turns out that Rand is one of these children. He was the son of a maiden. That child got taken away, and this is the first time. So a lot of the maidens become. I've said this loads of times. I love the way it's written. A lot of the maidens react to this because a lot of them would have had to have given up children at various points.
So Rand's like their surrogate baby.
He's like their surrogate baby. So he comes in at like 17 and he's the first confirmed, because they're never told this is a maiden's baby, but he's the first confirmed returned. This son here, this boy who's 15, 16, is a maiden's child. And they all suddenly treat him completely different. Yeah. The ones who are roughly his age treat him like a brother. And they're like, you little dipshit, whatever, blah, blah. The older ladies treat him like a son. Yeah. So, they're literally mothering him and making sure he's got sandwiches in his bag. These are women who, as I said, would fuck you up.
Oh, yeah.
And yet they're still like, oh, yeah.
And they also become really his personal bodyguard. And this is a recurring tension that he basically keeps trying to keep them from actually being put in danger. And they're like, dude, absolutely not. Yeah. But it's interesting because we then also have a number of societies that are either essentially mostly kind of gender equal or actually even women seem to dominate. So the Domani, the professional merchants are all or entirely women. In Andor, as we said before, they only have queens, they don't have kings. And then there's a ton of other kingdoms where it's normal that the order of succession seems to have no gender restrictions whatsoever. And we have a lot of reigning queens throughout the books.
There are more female leaders than male leaders. And in most of the societies that we come to, women are at a higher level. And it makes sense in the world that he's created, because 3,000 years ago, men went mad.
Right.
The women didn't go mad. Every male Aes Sedai, after the breaking happened, after they sealed the Dark One in, there might have been 5,000 male magicians or, male Aes Sedai. They all went crazy.
Right.
And that's what led to the destruction of half of the planet, basically.
And so, nobody trusts men, which is fair.
So nobody trusts men. So a lot of them have women as rulers. As you said about the Domini, the women are in charge of, they're the merchants and they do all of the merchant talking. If you look at the sea folk, who are basically are a society of pirates, all of the ship's captains are women.
Right. So men still predominate in military roles, but women predominate in leadership roles.
Exactly. So each of the countries that we come across, I mean, there's 12. 9 of them start off with female leaders. And the 3 that don't have female leaders are fooked super, super quick, or have an idiot on the throne. Right?
Yeah.
Or when we get to Tyr, it's run by the High Lords, and they're all dickheads. And half of them are dark friends.
Yeah, they all
suck. It's...
Yeah, and it is really interesting because, I mean, I really appreciate it. And because to some extent, I enjoy a lot of things about Game of Thrones, but there's something just sort of depressing about, I'm going to write a fantasy novel, and we're going to definitely have the same, depressing patriarchal gender system that sucked during the Middle Ages and still exists in, 21st century America and Europe, and also still sucks. And, there's just, a little something depressing about, oh, we just still have this. And so, to some extent, I think, that's something valuable about the fact that, you're not writing historical fiction, you're writing fantasy, is that you are not bound to preserve that kind of gender system.
That's when we're talking about Game of Thrones, and see, it's hard not to sound like I'm coming across really harsh on it. Game of Thrones is a well-written set of books. The first 4 seasons of TV show are really well produced and made TV show.
And on gender, I will say some of the women characters in Game of Thrones, I think, are absolutely brilliant and well written.
The problem with Game of Thrones is that those brilliant, well-written characters, 60 to 70% of them are going to be raped by the end of the series for no reason other than, are you shocked yet?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to happen. You're medieval, or me, you're medieval. You're medieval.
I'm medieval.
You're medieval. You made a tweet there last week as we're talking about this, or this week as we're talking about this, where you said medieval is not a synonym for bad.
Right, in response to the Washington Post argument, the Washington Post article that's the handling of the pandemic has been medieval. It's no, actually, they did a better job in response to the Black Death than Trump is doing right now in the United States. So shut the fuck up.
And it's not. Whereas a lot of writers writing in this thing just don't get that. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad. You don't have to take the headline, which is women were seen as second-class citizens, go, well, I have to make women second-class citizens in my book. That's not how it works. There were queens back then too, guys.
Yeah.
There were women who, Sarah, you know way more about this than me because I've only read, I'm quoting your research here. Women were merchants. Women were doing all of these stuff. And it's refreshing when you're reading Wheel of Time to find so many women in positions of power.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I want to talk about this is Robert Jordan allows female characters to be petty.
Yeah.
He allows them to be annoying. Because he's writing them, and you might say to yourself, oh, what do you mean he allows them? Well, he's in charge of what's going into the books, right? The same as George R. R. Martin is in charge of what goes in the books. And he chose to write an 11-year-old giving oral sex to a 33-year-old man. Nobody made him do that. That's his decision. Yeah. And it's also okay, I mean, also you do that and you're oh, I had to do that. But it's actually most marriages were actually later than you, he makes these marriages, he makes them so young. And there actually weren't that many marriages that we have, at least not marriages that we have reason to think were consummated with people under 16. Who were 12. Yeah. It's yes, we're not saying
16 is great either, but
it wasn't always happening,
Yeah.
which is what's happening in
Yeah.
Game of Thrones, right? But so when I say that he allows them to be petty, I spent a good chunk of my life reading fantasy novels where the female characters were one of two things: one, sex objects, or two, perfect.
Yeah.
Those were your two options. You couldn't have a female character who was an asshole.
Yeah.
Well, read The Wheel of Time, guys, because there are a lot of female characters who are just assholes.
Yeah.
They're not evil. Like, even if you take our main characters, and I love each of these.
They're all flawed. Like, I love them, but they're flawed.
Moraine, who is about as close to a perfect character as you can get, keeps secrets for no reason.
Yeah.
She does double talk because she's taken the oath rod and she's not allowed to tell a lie. So she double talks a lot because, you know, she's being vague with her answers. But also, sometimes she's just a bit of a bitch.
Right.
Like,
and like Nynaeve has a temper and often lets it out on people who don't deserve it. You know, I love Elaine, but Elaine, like, Min tells her in a viewings, like, so she gets pregnant, so Rand impregnates her. And Min's like, oh, don't worry, your babies will be born safely. And she's like, oh, cool. So I can do any dangerous shit that I want because it's fine.
I love it.
Because, like, I know the babies will be born safely. So that means that, like, I am protected from any harm for as long as I'm pregnant. And it's like, come on, lady, come on.
It's the most male thought process. Like, I don't know how many times I've read a story where there's the chosen one.
Yeah.
And that means the chosen one goes, well, it says in the prophecy that I'm going to be here, so that means I can't die here. And you're like, yeah, I mean, technically, yeah, but I mean, you could break your back.
Right, yeah. Like, she could hit her head and like lose all brain function, but like remain technically alive for long enough to give birth. Like, that is a possibility. It does not happen, fortunately, but like, come on.
These are all things that make absolutely perfect sense to anybody who's ever met a real person. Right. The boys can be dicks about certain things. The girls can be dicks about certain things. But when we talk about gender and equality and all this, I just threw my hands up like, equality! In The Wheel of Time. The one thing that I think a lot of people miss out if they stop after book 1 or book 2 is that the best villains in this series are women. Yeah. Right? Grendel is a mistress of compulsion. She's described as being an artiste in it, right? She can bend the minds of pretty much anyone she talks to. She loves beautiful people. So she has all of her servants are beautiful people that she's mind controlled. She is collecting kings and queens from this world. So their characters called Forsaken. Just think of them as ancient magic users who've been walled up with the Dark One for 3,000 years. They've got an axe to grind. And she's just collecting beautiful people. Like, this is introduced as like just a minor plot point. In the first time you meet her is in book 3. And it's just like, well, who is this? Oh, well, that's he would have been the king of Ebu Dar. Right. Right? And you're like, wait, what? Yeah, oh yeah. And that's the queen of Arid-Duman. She went missing, but, I've got her. And that's this person who is meant to be the 5th most important of the bad guys is collecting kings and queens to act as her footstool. Right. Like, that's the level of evil we have in this person. And when people go, oh, well, Cersei did this, and we're like, yeah, but this woman literally destroyed 10 countries because she felt like it. Like, it's just all of the female characters are evils. Liandrin, love her. Yeah. She's one of the major villains for the first 4 books. She's a Black Aja. She's a bitch. She's described as beautiful. Men love her, and she's one of the Red Aja originally. But she has no interest in men, but she will use them to her advantage and just toss them aside. And one of...
As we all do.
Exactly. Elida, that we talked about, usurps the Pope's position.
Elida, the anti-Pope Elida.
The anti-Pope Elida. She is terrible at what she does, and she takes it out on people. Like she has, like if you just imagine,
she's very petty. And that's the thing, yeah. And I was just gonna say also, like, and that is the thing, is that like I like that, like, she is somebody who's like, she's not evil, she just sucks. And one of the things that I think it was the Bechdel cast that at some point said, like, what we deserve is like representation of mediocre women. And like I like it,
exactly,
yeah, and I really like that, like,
what it
we
is.
have a lot of that. Like, we have women who are very like talented and powerful and good at what they do, but they're still very flawed. We have like women who like just suck, like Elida. Like she just sucks. Like she's bad at her job and she's a jerk. Like
It's the same. It comes up a lot again, also in fantasy as well. People talking about LGBTQ characters, and they go, "Oh, it's PC gone mad. Oh, it's just shallow representation." Or the big one, the one that I hate, is when somebody writes down their opinion is, "I don't mind." First of all, the fact that you would ever think that what you mind is important, shut the fuck up.
If you are a white cishet white man, then of course you think what you mind is important.
Exactly. It's like I see. That's the thing, is I'm sitting here talking. I've talked more than you on this episode, Sarah, and it's something I always tried to avoid when I was co-host, because it's your podcast.
I'll give you a pass. I know you love Wheel of Time and know more about Wheel of Time than I do.
I hope so. Find it better. But the people who say, I don't mind that an LGBTQ plus character has been added, as long as they bring something new.
Like, we don't have that inherently is something new, is that like LGBTQ plus people like deserve representation. And also, like, there are people in the world who like are gay or bi or whatever, and like, or trans, and they just like exist in the world, and they're just regular people. Like,
that's it. They can be there and just be a person. It just so happens that guy likes that guy. It doesn't have to be, oh, I don't mind if they bring in a gay character. You know, as long as there's a different story to tell. No, you can tell the same stories, because gay people are people.
Yeah. And I like that, like, there actually are like none of the major characters, but there are references to queer relationships that is just like basically nobody bats an eye, and it's just like whatever.
There's one gay character in the Wheel of Time, as a gay man character.
Mm-hmm. And
he doesn't show up until book 14. And it's thrown away with like, oh, he prefers the company of men. And you're like, and the guy, but Androl's response is like, oh,
I never knew.
Like, I never knew. Like, and that's the thing. He was a normal person. He wasn't writing perfect characters, and he wasn't a perfect writer. But he did a lot for showing, as you said, mediocre women, mediocre men. There is no superstar. Even our main character, as I said, has flaws. Our main female characters have flaws. But there's one character I do want to talk about, because I don't think I've ever hated a female character in a series of books more than I hate the character of Savannah in The Wheel of Time. She's a villain. Mean. That she's mean as well, but she is everything a villainous character should be. She just happens to be a woman, right? But all of her decision making is selfish. Yeah. She does not care about the Dark One. She is not about the Dark One.
Yeah, she does not give a shit about any of the other shit that's going on. She just wants like her own situation to get to where she wants it to be.
So we talked about wise women there a little bit. So in the Aiel, this warrior society, the men become clan chiefs, but the women become wise women who advise the clan chiefs. And let's face it, tell the clan chiefs what to do. The men are in charge, but the wise women are telling.
Right. It's the kind of like informal, to some extent, power, which actually is pretty common in the real medieval world.
Exactly. Savannah finagles her way into being a wise woman because she knows that's where the power is. Mm-hmm. She convinces her lover, Couladin, to pretend that he is the equivalent of Rand, the Dragon Reborn, which leads to a schism between them, which leads to a huge war, which leads to millions of things. And she literally does it for her own
Just so
power.
she can essentially become like queen.
Yeah. That's it. It's not, oh, good versus evil and I'm picking the evil side. She's just going, there's a power vacuum here. I am going to take that power.
Yeah.
And it leads to a ton of stuff involving kidnappings and murders.
Well, because then she does all this fucked up shit to basically like try to like force Rand to marry her.
The idea is that Savannah is just a bad guy.
Yeah.
And it's so rare in fantasy novels to come across a woman who is a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because she was a jilted lover, and it's not because she wants to get revenge because something happened when she was 15.
Right.
She's a bad guy because she was raised and she's a bitch and she wants to
She's just a selfish jerk.
Selfish jerk. And it's so refreshing. And I hated her. Now, I obviously loved, it's like when people say, I hate X character, what they're really saying is, I love that character.
Right. The characters that you love to hate, yeah.
Exactly. I'm assuming Sarah loved her.
No, I know she's awful, but like she's a good character. I think she's a really well written antagonist. And the other thing I will say, like going back to, we were talking a bit about queer representation, like it's relatively light, but I also like do think honestly, like it's not bad for a book series that was started in 1990. Like, 1990 to 2013, like, I don't fully give things a pass for the exact time in which they came out, but like for the time in which it came out, the fact that there's any reference to queer sexuality, even if it's really pretty much only women or almost only women, like, it's better than nothing. And nothing is what you get in a lot of fantasy.
Very open about his own weaknesses in that area. And look, there should be gay characters. Mm-hmm. Like nobody will anybody who sits there and says, no, there shouldn't be gay characters. There should be. But I don't even want to give it a pass. Like I've talked extensively to this with you for the last 15 months. I love this series more than any other series of books I've ever read. And I'm not going to try and give it a pass because it should be there.
Right.
I understand why it's not, but the reality is that is a weakness in this series.
Absolutely.
It's not the only weakness in the series. It's not a perfect series, but at least it's something that we can look at and say, imagine if the Wheel of Time, they'd have gay characters.
Especially because I also think it would be fascinating if they dealt with trans characters. Because one of the things that's really interesting is that, so you have the Forsaken and some of them die, and then some of them get reborn into new bodies. And one of them is a man who gets reborn into a female body. But, every reason to think that this person still essentially identifies as a man, and they still use the male half of the one power.
When that first got written, or when people first got to think, because again, that book came out in 2001, where we get the character of Halima, and Halima is or Osengar, and he's one of the first Forsaken who dies and comes back, and people were reading that as an anti-trans message.
I would say it does kind of suck that the only trans character is a villain. I do get that criticism, but I think that the concept that it's gender identity, not the body that is assigned to you, was what determines your magic use. I actually think that really does like open the possibility that like had there been broader trans representation, I actually think it could have been really well done.
Well, because Jordan had this. The criticism was labeled that, or was not labeled that, it was directed at him. And again, this is the kind of stuff that comes up a lot in criticizing Robert Jordan, is people go, oh, well, he's anti-trans because he said that X, Y, and Z. He was asked about this. Like, this is not something that was brushed aside. And he answered the question. They said, why does Osengar, who was Agenor, why do they still use the male source even though they're in a female body? And what he said was, your soul determines what type of source you are. So if your soul is male, it doesn't matter if you're in a female body. Your soul is male. You can do whatever you want to the vessel that's on the outside. but your soul on the inside is what represents your personal gender. And somebody was like, well, that's anti-trans. He was like, no, because I believe that if there was a person who's born with a female body and they've got a man's soul, then if they identify as a man, then they're a man.
Right. And it is actually, it's pretty clear that the female body was actually not something they wanted or wished for. It was something, it's not like they were born into a masculine body and then transitioned on purpose to a female body. It was inflicted upon them.
And they wanted, like, their thought process is constantly, I want to get to a male body.
Right.
Because...
And there's, and as I said, I don't think it's done perfectly by any means, but like there are like interesting like hints at like gender dysmorphia, like, and as I said, like I, certainly would not want to speak for the trans community that I do not belong to, but like.
Don't worry, Sarah. I'm a white cis male. I'll speak for any community.
So, we're both cis people. And so like, to some extent, as I said, don't want to speak for that community, but like, especially, as we've been comparing this on a number of occasions to Harry Potter, where there are no trans characters. And also we now know that J.K. Rowling is a transphobic piece of garbage. Like, this, as I said, it's not perfect, but it, I think, is like in the right direction to some extent, in terms of like I think it paves the way for, if Jordan was still alive or if books written in this universe that took place in this universe were still being written, I think that there is actually like already in-universe justification for having a well-written trans character, I guess.
It's not written perfectly. Yeah. I mean, I joke about being a cis male and talking for everybody, but I don't want to talk for anybody. If there are trans people who've read these books and go, I fucking hate this, I 100%
absolutely.
Right? And another thing that comes up online and forums a lot is like, oh, I have a trans friend who loves it. It doesn't matter if you have a trans friend who loves it. It doesn't mean that all trans people should love it.
And I really like the representation of female characters. If another woman does not, that is her right. But
exactly. The only reason I even bring it up, and I stress about how I think the characters or the female characters are well written, is just because I see it as a very common, don't read the Wheel of Time. It's misogynistic.
Yeah, and I was very surprised to hear that critique reading the books, because that did not at any point really stick out to me. Because as I said, like there's misogynistic sentiments expressed by some of the main characters, but I don't think there's ever a clear reason to think that those are the author's sentiments as opposed to sentiments that are realistic for basically some like kind of shit teenage boys.
Sarah, I think we've been recording now for over 2 hours, so maybe it might be a good idea to break this episode into 2.
I don't know. I think the 4-hour episode is the way we're going in podcasts now, but we can take a break if you want.
You are being very risky thinking that I'll be able to stop talking about this in only 4 hours. But maybe if we were to stop here and then we can pick off in the next episode from this point in the conversation. We can talk about religion and links to medieval history.
That sounds good.
Sarah, since I no longer run the podcast, and I never ran the podcast, what am I even talking about? But since I no longer am on the podcast, do you have anything to plug at the end of this episode?
Yes. So I would just like to remind all of the listeners that if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media Evil on Apple Podcasts. I'll read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. And please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media Evil Pod and join our Facebook group, which is the one place on the internet where you can also find Ollie. And
it is the only place on the internet. There's a few other groups, but you'd have to find me in Media Evil first.
Right.
To then find out what other groups I'm in.
Exactly. And if you want to find me on the internet, you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah F. Decker. And if you have any questions, you can also email me at media.evilpod@gmail.com. So, Ollie, thanks for talking about Wheel of Time with me.
Bye.
Bye.